This is Ellie, who's getting a treat right now, and this is Blue. And they're both breaking a new rule, not being allowed in the furniture, but this is the roadmap to success, and we'll talk about the rules here in a second. I have a handful of treats, so if you see them going up my hand, let me know, and remind me, and I'll show you a quick little demo of the leave it exercise if we have a little time.
Gotcha.
All right, so basically, a puppy, not a puppy, but still a pretty young dog. Sit's very interesting. And so basically the reason I got called in is the guardian, the male guardian the dogs listen to, the female guardian the dogs don't listen to as well. I think there's a couple reasons for this. One of them is the female guardian wasn't around for part of his upbringing, correct?
Her
upbringing. Yeah. And he's a puppy, he's boisterous. But basically the other thing is the other guardian does not do anything abusive. But he is a little bit more physical in his corrections with the dogs, and that's the old way of dog training, and I really don't practice that. What I do is exclusively force-free and positive reinforcement. I want to basically create a scenario, where the dog can stumble into doing something I want, and when it does, that's the intent, and when it does, I get rewarded. When it does anything else, I don't punish it, I don't get upset, I don't get angry, I just have to be patient and wait. That's why we do these stage scenarios to teach or not to teach the dog, but to help the dog learn for itself. If I teach the dog to sit in every situation, I have to micromanage the dog. But instead, one of the first things I showed the guardians when we came in is the door, not a door claiming exercise, but teaching the dogs to be calm at the door. So we put the dog on, we put one of the dogs in the other room. The other dog was on a leash. Actually, we started with him, I believe. And then the guardian was stepping on the leash at the end of the leash. So he had about 3 or 4 feet of leash, and she opened the door, so I was able to come in by myself. I came in and I stayed just right outside of the dog's reach. And he was like super dogging it up and trying to get to me. And as soon as he calmed down, I turned to face him, hey buddy, and I started to pet him. As soon as I turned to face him and tried to engage with him, he got up and wiggled. So I pulled my arms back and I stepped just a half a step away, so I'm outside of his reach, and I waited sideways until he calmed down. When he calmed down, I re-engaged. When I do it, I make sure you do under the chin. And at first, you want to be very slow, and the idea is to keep the dog, he doesn't have to necessarily stay seated, but the energy stays low. But eventually, when you can do that and he stays seated the whole time you re-engage and start petting him, then you want to start doing it a little bit more excitedly, And we just got done doing a demo outside the video above this. As we were doing that, there were a couple women that were coming into the building, and I said, "Can I, hey, would you like to pet me?" They're like, "Sure." They're like, "Oh, no!" And the dog, and he did exactly that. And he jumped up, and it was a perfect example because that's what people do: is they make these high-pitched voices, which gets the dog excited, and then the dog jumps up, and we continue petting him. Now, anything a dog is doing sit, when we pet it, is what we're reinforcing. So he sat, and that was something I liked, so I rewarded him for doing that. But if the dog jumps up on me and I pet the dog, well, then I'm training the dog. Jumping up on the human is the way of asking for attention. So I shared a little advice for women. I'm like, if you're ever petting a dog and the dog gets excited, if you stop engaging with the dog, again, this is kind of what I talked about the stage scenarios. I refer to this a lot as light switch on, light switch off. When the dog is calm, I'm very interested in petting it. As soon as it starts getting excited, I turn the light switch off, I become uninterested. And I wait for the dog to settle itself down. Not telling it to sit, not telling it to calm down. As soon as it settles itself down, then I automatically re-engage with the dog. And as soon as he gets excited again, I disengage. So on, off. And eventually, Blue starts sitting down on his own. I didn't tell him to sit, but he was like, and after a while, they're like, when people come to the door, if I'm calm, they're all over me. If I'm excited, they're not interested. And then I would practice with each dog separately because the 2 dogs will cascade and bounce off of each other. But eventually the dogs learn to be relaxed. Now, we can also do what's called a negative punishment. You would think all punishments are negative. Negative in this case, this is the 4th quadrant, this is Skinner of operant conditioning. Negative means to deduct something from the equation. So in this case, if you come in the door and the dogs are free, and this is something you could do, I would do the door, it's an interesting posture, I would do the door leash exercise first. But eventually when they stop jumping up, they're not as excited. When you come in the door, and just stay right at the doorway. If they start getting excited, step right outside the door, close the door, and wait. Now this is helpful. I do this with a lot with my clients in the Midwest who have double doors, so they can actually close the screen door and still see the dog. As far as here, you can't do that, so we might have to set up a security camera filming right there. Then you can sit outside, and as soon as the dogs are calm, you re-engage. You open the door. As soon as they get excited, you leave the room. So when they jump up, I want you to pet me, but I jumping up on you now causes you to leave? That's the opposite of petting me, so I'm going to stop doing that. Okay, now the reason these dogs act this way, I believe, is I asked the guardians about exercise, and the dogs get a good amount of exercise, which is great, but I would still recommend doing the exercise journal, use the laser, especially for the stairs, and exercise the dogs before we go for a walk. Play a game of fetch before we go for a walk. Go on the run and play a little fetch, then go for the walk. Burn off that top level energy. It's going to be easier for the dogs to pay attention. Now, I recommend an exercise journal for about a month. Write down the time, the duration of the walk, the number of fetches, the up and down, number of up and downs with the laser on the stairs or whatever it is. And also, any times there's a dust out or they're barking like crazy at the window or anything bad that happens. And then at the end of the day, give each dog a letter grade, A through F. And then the next day, play around with the variables. Are you trying to ask me something? And keep on playing around with the quantities and the frequencies of the exercise until eventually both dogs get an A+ rating. Then you're like, okay, now I know the exercise we need to get the dog. And when the dog gets really boisterous and in your face and naughty, you should ask yourself, how long has it been since the dog said to exercise? If it's been longer than like 90 minutes, then it probably is a dog's way of saying, I have too much extra energy. Take it out to the dog run and play a little fetch. Also, don't be afraid to Google scent games or get a book on scent games. That's a great way to deplete a dog's energy by making them use your brain, because dogs are scent animals. And these are 2 hunting dogs, so they'd be really good at it. Crash. That's passive training we'll talk about in a sec. Okay, so some of the rules we introduced are not being allowed in the furniture for 30 days. I recommended the Guardian get X pads so they can put it on the sections. This is a big couch, so we can have it on a section of the couch where we can sit over there and we don't have to enforce it. If the dog gets up on the couch, come here, buddy. And I want to teach them to get down. Come here, sweetheart. So what I do is I just toss the treat on the ground, off. Anytime the treat goes in a dog's mouth, they should hear the command word after it goes into their mouth. So when the dog jumps on the furniture, throw it on the ground, and then they get down and they lick it up and they hear the word off. And after enough reps, and if the dog jumps right back up, don't do it a second time. Then I would put the X pads up or block and not allow the dog up there. I would do the same thing for the bed. Right now, he's kenneled, sit, and she sleeps in the bed, but she sleeps right between both of her guardians. And so the guardians should invite her on the bed when we're done with at least 30 days of not being allowed on the furniture. And the reason for the furniture is not arbitrary. For the dogs, the higher they sit, the more rank or social status they have. And so if a dog sits the same height as you, that's a way we say that we're peers. And if we're peers, or the dog sees you as a peer, then listening to you becomes optional. So we want the dog to see a distinction. I showed the guardians how to teach, every time I take away the furniture, I always want to give the dog a dog bed. I showed the guardians how to go to the dog bed, which is actually called Duke, of course. And so now make sure you go through and let's put it over and Duke. Here we go. Oh, somebody's going to get it, not you. Duke. I have to guess, I can't see. Off. And if he does a behavior that you want voluntarily, we want to reward, recognize, and mark it with a command word right there. He got off on his own. I said the word off and gave him a treat because I happen to have some in my hand. I could just pet him and say off as well. Now, we want to avoid patting a dog on top of the head. Dogs, when they feel proud about themselves, their nose parallel to the ground or tilted up. Petting a dog on top of the head creates a down nose orientation. Now, I can scratch a dog anywhere I want. I make a dog sit like this, and I pet under the chin and say the word sit. Just the word sit, not good sit. Not sit, not Ellie sit, just sit. Now I give the dogs, I like giving dogs fun command words like we talked about off camera. And I give the dogs the same command words except permission to eat dinner, maybe a word to get them to come, and a word to be released from a stay. So that way, if the dogs have a stay or a wait command and we're on the street, we say wait. And I actually practice a lot with my Dalmatian Quest. I'm walking him and I'll just stop and he sits automatically because of what we did in the video above. And as soon as he does that, I drop the